Finally, someone in this family doing something useful. Her father's words cut through the celebration, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room. Lieutenant Colonel insignia on her shoulders, years of command behind her, and still she was invisible. Then the door opened. An officer she'd saved in Afghanistan walked straight toward her, came to attention and saluted. The room went silent. Her parents' faces froze, but the truth hadn't been revealed yet. I'm Diana, 39 years old, an Air Force officer who earned my rank through 2 decades of flight hours, deployments, and command decisions. For years, I supported my family financially and emotionally, celebrating my younger brother's every achievement as though it were my own triumph. But at his promotion ceremony, when my parents dismissed me in front of his entire squadron, something inside me shifted. I made a choice that would change the course of all our relationships. Have you ever been overlooked by the very people you've supported your whole life? If you have, you understand what I'm about to tell you. This is a story about recognition that comes not from demanding it, but from building a record that speaks louder than any voice in the room. I grew up understanding that I existed in the margins of my parents' attention. Not that I was unloved, but that I was secondary. My brother Garrett was 6 years younger, which meant he became the center of gravity in our family just as I was finding my own path. When I joined the Air Force at 22, fresh from the academy with pilot training ahead of me, Garrett was still in high school, all teenage confidence and unformed ambition. I remember coming home on leave during his senior year, watching him fill out applications for the academy. Our mother hovered over him with an intensity she'd never brought to my own paperwork years before. She kept saying this was his moment, his future taking shape. I didn't correct her or mention that I'd already navigated this exact process. I waited until she left the kitchen, then leaned over and pointed to a section he'd missed on the form. They want to see leadership, I told him quietly. Not just participation. Show them where you made decisions that affected other people. He looked up, surprised I was still in the room. You think debate team counts? Anything where you had responsibility for outcomes. That's what matters to them. He nodded and wrote it down without thanking me. That became our pattern. I'd return between deployments to find some new crisis-waiting scholarship essays. Flight school interviews, roommate problems at his training detachment. I'd offer guidance, make phone calls to contacts I'd built over the years. Once even drove 4 hours to help him move out of a complicated lease situation. He accepted everything with the casual assumption of someone who'd never had to ask twice for help. Our father liked to say Garrett had the right temperament for command. What he meant was that Garrett was loud where I was measured, quick to speak where I chose my words carefully. Dad had spent time in the army decades back, enough to form opinions but not enough to understand how much military culture had evolved. When he looked at Garrett, he saw a reflection of himself. When he looked at me, he saw something he couldn't quite categorize. I made captain at 26, right on schedule according to the promotion timeline. Garrett called to congratulate me, then spent 20 minutes talking about his upcoming commissioning ceremony. I didn't mind. I'd grown accustomed to being the supporting character in the family narrative. By that point, I'd logged hundreds of flight hours, including a deployment to Kandahar that I couldn't discuss in detail even with family. I came back different, not broken, but recalibrated in ways that don't fit dinner table conversation. I understood things about fear and leadership that couldn't be explained to people who hadn't been there. My parents asked if I was okay. When I said yes, they seemed relieved to move on to easier topics. Garrett pinned on his second lieutenant insignia 3 years after I made captain. I was stationed in Germany at the time, so I watched the ceremony through a shaky video call, my mother's phone swinging wildly between Garrett's face and the cheering crowd. She cried. My father saluted even though he'd been out of uniform for decades, and it wasn't really appropriate anymore. Garrett stood there grinning, 22 years old and certain the world was opening up just for him. And in many ways it was. He got a solid first assignment. Flew training missions, worked with capable officers who helped shape him. When he called me, it was always to share updates about his progress, sometimes to ask for advice that he'd later repackage as his own insight. I never called him out on it. What would have been the point? After my 3rd deployment, I transferred to operations leadership. It wasn't a step back, though my parents seemed to interpret it that way. So you're not flying anymore? My mother asked, her voice careful as though she were asking about a demotion. I'm managing the people who fly, I explained. It's a different kind of responsibility. But you loved flying. I still do. This is how I serve the mission now. She didn't understand, and I didn't have the energy to push the explanation further. My father was more direct. Sounds like a desk job, he said. Sounds like you're stepping back from the real work. I could have explained that operational command at that level meant coordinating missions across multiple aircraft types, managing hundreds of personnel, making decisions that affected lives across entire theatres of operation. I could have told him about the combat support mission I'd flown in Helmand Province, the one that had unravelled in ways I still couldn't discuss because portions remained classified. Instead, I just said, "It's where they need me," and let the subject drop. Garrett progressed from first lieutenant to captain. He called less frequently, but when he did, there was a new edge to his voice. Confidence shading into something close to condescension. "You should have stayed in the cockpit if you wanted to stay relevant," he said once, laughing as though it were friendly teasing. I was a major by then, running a joint training operation with 300 personnel under my command. I didn't bother correcting his misunderstanding of how career progression actually worked. Around that time, Garrett started talking about his new commanding officer, Major Marcus Brennan. "He's the real thing," Garrett would say with admiration. "Combat missions in Afghanistan. Decorated for valor, knows everyone worth knowing. He's the kind of officer I want to become." I didn't recognize the name, but that wasn't unusual. The Air Force is vast, and my deployments had been years earlier. I was glad Garrett had found a strong mentor. He needed one to grow beyond his natural overconfidence. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Marcus Brennan had been on the ground in Helmand Province in the summer of 2013. He was part of a small forward unit that got pinned down during what should have been a routine supply movement. I'd been flying armed escort that day, one of 2 aircraft tasked with providing protection from above. When the ambush hit, we diverted immediately. What followed was 40 minutes of the kind of close air support that doesn't make highlight videos because it's too chaotic, too close, too dependent on split-second decisions where one wrong move could kill the people you're trying to save. We got them out, all of them. I took shrapnel in the process, enough to earn me a medal for heroism and 3 weeks of recovery time, most of which I spent frustrated that I couldn't get back in the cockpit. The citation was classified for years because of the sensitive nature of the mission details. By the time it was declassified, I'd moved into a different phase of my career. I didn't talk about it. Not because I was modest, but because the people who needed to know already knew, and everyone else wouldn't understand what it meant anyway. Garrett never asked about my deployments. Not really. He'd say things like, "So what was Afghanistan like?" and then check his phone before I could form an answer. My parents were the same way. They wanted the headline version, the story they could mention casually to their friends. Our daughter served overseas. It sounded impressive without requiring them to engage with uncomfortable details. So when Garrett's promotion to captain came through and my parents started planning a family gathering to celebrate, I didn't expect anything different. I was a lieutenant colonel by then, stationed 2 states away, running operations for a unit that had just earned top marks in a major readiness inspection. I should have been too busy to attend, but he was my brother. Despite everything, I wanted to be there for him. I requested leave, booked a flight, pressed my service uniform until every crease was sharp, and drove 3 hours to the base where his ceremony would be held. I arrived early, checked in at the security gate, and parked near the building where they'd set up the reception area. The ceremony itself went smoothly. Garrett stood at attention while his squadron commander read the official orders, pinned the new rank insignia on his uniform, and shook his hand firmly. He looked sharp and composed, every inch the officer my parents had always envisioned. They sat in the front row beaming with pride. The reception afterward was held in a wood-panelled room that smelled like floor polish and coffee that had been sitting too long on the warmer. About 40 people attended. Squadron members, a few family friends, some junior officers who were there because attendance was expected as part of the informal duty of showing support. I stood near the back in my service uniform, the lieutenant colonel insignia clearly visible on my shoulders, but apparently not interesting enough for anyone to notice or comment on. My mother found me first. She kissed my cheek and told me I looked thin. "You're working too hard," she said with concern. "You need to take better care of yourself." "I'm fine, Mom." "Are you eating enough? You know how you get when you're stressed." I assured her I was eating regularly, sleeping adequately, functioning like a normal adult. She patted my arm in that way mothers do and drifted back toward my father, who was holding court near the refreshments table, already telling stories to anyone who would listen. Garrett was surrounded by well-wishers, shaking hands and laughing at jokes I couldn't hear from where I stood. He saw me across the room and waved, a quick acknowledgement that didn't invite me to approach. I waved back and stayed where I was, content to observe from the margins. Someone had arranged a small table with a cake that read, "Congratulations, Captain Garrett," in blue icing. My mother positioned herself next to it, holding a plastic cup of punch as though it were champagne at a formal event. She raised it high, waiting for the conversations around the room to quiet down. "I just want to say a few words," she announced clearly. The room gradually fell silent. People turned to face her. "We are so incredibly proud of Garrett. He's worked so hard to reach this point, and we always knew he was destined for great things." She pointed at Garrett, her smile wide and unshakable. "To our hero." My father stepped forward, grinning broadly. "That's right. Our son, the officer. Finally, someone in this family doing something useful." He looked directly at me when he said it. Not a casual glance. Not an accident. A deliberate look paired with a laugh that tried to frame it as a joke. But we both knew it wasn't. The room offered uncomfortable chuckles, complicit in the moment. I felt my spine straighten automatically, a trained response. My face remained neutral. I'd trained for far worse than this kind of casual cruelty. Garrett looked down at his feet, perhaps embarrassed, perhaps just avoiding eye contact with me. My mother sipped her punch, either oblivious to the impact of what had just been said or choosing not to acknowledge it. The moment stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Then the door opened. Major Marcus Brennan walked in, still in his flight suit, carrying a small wooden plaque under one arm. He was maybe 35, compact and precise in his movements. The kind of officer who radiated competence without having to announce it. He scanned the room quickly, nodded at a few people in recognition, and then his eyes landed on me. He stopped walking. His expression shifted through recognition, confusion, something close to shock. Then he walked directly toward me, weaving through the crowd with the focused purpose of someone on a mission. People stepped aside instinctively. My father was mid-sentence, saying something about Garrett's next assignment. When Brennan stopped directly in front of me, the entire room went quiet. "Ma'am," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the silence. "You're the pilot from Helmand." It took me a second to place him. Thinner back then, younger, covered in dust and blood that wasn't his own. The forward operating base, the supply convoy, the ambush that went wrong. "Major Brennan," I said evenly. "It's good to see you." He didn't smile. He came to attention, sharp and formal, and saluted me. "Mum, it is an honor to see you again." I returned the salute automatically, professionally. He held it a beat longer than standard protocol required, his eyes locked on mine. And I understood he wasn't just acknowledging me. He was making a statement to everyone watching. The room was completely silent now, the kind of silence that has physical weight to it. My father's mouth hung open slightly. My mother looked between us, confused by what was happening. Garrett stood frozen near the celebration cake, his new rank still shiny and unfamiliar on his shoulders. Brennan lowered his salute, stepped back slightly, and turned to face Garrett. "Captain, congratulations on your promotion. Your sister is one hell of an officer. I hope you understand that." Garrett nodded mutely, unable to form words. Brennan handed him the ceremonial plaque, shook his hand firmly, then turned back to me. "I didn't know you were going to be here, Ma'am. If I'd known, I would have made sure you were properly recognized at the ceremony itself." "That's not necessary," I said quietly. "It is necessary," he replied. "But I understand if you prefer to keep a low profile." He nodded once more, then walked calmly to the refreshments table, poured himself a cup of coffee, and started talking to another officer as though nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everything had happened. The entire dynamic of the room had shifted in those few moments. My mother approached me, her face showing polite confusion. "What was that about?" "We served together," I said simply, "in Afghanistan." "Oh, well, that's nice." She didn't ask for any details. Didn't pursue the obvious questions about what kind of service would warrant that kind of formal respect. My father was less tactful. He cornered me near the door, his voice careful. "You never mentioned you knew a senior officer in Garrett's command chain. It didn't come up in conversation. You could have said something earlier. Made it a bigger deal for Garrett." I looked at him. This man who'd spent my entire adult life dismissing my career as either reckless or irrelevant. I felt nothing but tired. "I don't make things a bigger deal than they are," I said calmly. I just do the work I'm assigned. He frowned, started to say something else, then thought better of it and walked away. Garrett found me as I was preparing to leave. Hey, he said, his voice uncertain. Wait. I stopped and turned to face him. He looked uncomfortable, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes looking anywhere but directly at me. Why didn't you tell us you were in Helmand Province, that you knew Major Brennan? You never asked. I didn't know it was important. It wasn't important. Not to you. He flinched at that. That's not fair, isn't it? I kept my voice level and calm. Garrett, I've been serving for 17 years. I've deployed 4 times to combat zones. I've held multiple commands, run complex operations, made decisions that directly affected whether people lived or died. And not once have you asked me what any of that was actually like. So, no, I didn't bring up Helmand Province because I didn't think you'd genuinely care to hear about it. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again to find words. I do care. You care now because someone you respect made it impossible to ignore. That's different from actually caring before. I didn't wait for his response. I walked to my car, got in and drove back to my hotel. My phone buzzed twice during the drive. Once from my mother, once from Garrett. I didn't check the messages until the next morning. My mother's message read, "That was awkward. You could have handled things better." Garrett's message said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go like that." I deleted both messages without responding. I flew back to my duty station the next day, wheels up at 1 in the afternoon. It was the kind of flight where you stare out the window at clouds and think about nothing in particular, letting your mind process everything without conscious effort. By the time I landed, I'd mentally filed the entire event away with all the other uncomfortable family gatherings I'd endured over the years. It wasn't anger I felt, it was clarity. I'd spent years making allowances, offering support, showing up for people without any expectation of acknowledgement in return. I'd done it because that's what you're supposed to do for family, or at least that's what I'd been raised to believe. But standing in that reception hall, watching my father laugh at my expense while my mother toasted the child who'd never had to fight for her attention, I realized something simple and clear. I was done. Not done with them necessarily, but done expecting them to see me for who I actually was. Colonel Elena Cortez was waiting in my office when I got back. She was 52, sharp-eyed, with the kind of posture that made everyone around her stand a little straighter just from proximity. She'd been my mentor since I was a captain, one of the few senior officers who treated me like a complete person rather than a diversity statistic or a curiosity to be studied. "You look like you had a wonderful time," she said without looking up from the file she was reading. "It was fine. That bad, huh?" I dropped my bag on the desk and sat down heavily. My parents held a reception for my brother's promotion. They toasted him as the family hero. My father made a joke about someone in the family finally doing something useful while looking directly at me. Then my brother's commanding officer walked in, recognized me from Helmand Province, and saluted me in front of everyone. Cortez looked up from her paperwork. "Marcus Brennan. I know him by reputation. Solid officer. Flew combat support in Afghanistan. Did some time in joint operations after that." She tilted her head slightly. "So he recognized you from the rescue mission." "Apparently. My family had no idea what he was talking about. They never asked about your deployments. They never asked about anything that mattered." Cortez set the file down and leaned back in her chair. "Diana, you're one of the best officers I've worked with in 3 decades. You're precise, strategic, you don't let ego cloud your operational judgment. But you have a significant blind spot when it comes to your family." "I know. Do you really? Because from where I'm sitting, you keep giving them chances to see you for who you are, and they keep choosing not to look. At some point, that pattern becomes your choice to maintain, not theirs." It was a hard thing to hear, but she wasn't wrong. I'd been operating under the assumption that consistency would eventually earn recognition. That if I just kept showing up and doing excellent work, they would eventually notice. But people don't notice what they're not actively looking for. "I'm not going to the next family dinner," I said. Cortez smiled slightly. "Good. Now let's talk about your next assignment." She handed me the file she'd been reading when I walked in. It was a set of orders, freshly printed, transferring me from the Joint Training Operation to an Air Mobility Command leadership position. My own operational unit. Over 300 personnel split between active duty and reserve components, responsible for everything from strategic airlift to aerial refueling operations. It was a significant step up, The kind of assignment that marked you as someone the Air Force was actively investing in for future senior leadership. When? I asked. 60 days. You'll take command in a formal ceremony. They want you there by mid-November. I looked at the orders, then back at Cortez. You recommended me for this position? I did. You've more than earned it. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of it settle in. This was what actually mattered. Not my parents' approval, not Garrett's belated recognition. The mission. The people under my command. The work itself? Thank you, Mom. Don't thank me. Just don't mess it up. She stood and straightened her uniform. Diana, let your record speak for itself. You don't need to explain yourself to people who've already decided not to listen. She left, and I sat there for a long time staring at the orders in my hands. That evening, I drafted a brief email to my mother. I won't be able to make Thanksgiving this year. I'm transferring to a new command and will be in the middle of transition operations. I'll call when I'm settled. I didn't mention Garrett. Didn't offer any explanation beyond the basic logistical facts. I hit send and felt lighter immediately. 2 days later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Diana, this is overly dramatic. We didn't mean anything by what was said at the reception. You're being too sensitive about this. Please call me back. I didn't return the call. Garrett sent a text message. Hey, I know things got weird at the ceremony. I'm sorry about that. Can we talk? I replied simply, I'm in the middle of a major transfer. We'll talk later when things settle down. Later became a deliberately flexible concept. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a constant stream of briefings, handoffs, and complex logistics. I met extensively with my successor, a sharp lieutenant colonel named Briggs, who asked intelligent questions and took detailed notes as though his career depended on understanding every nuance. I walked him through all the personnel files, the ongoing projects, the potential problems to watch for. I handed over my command with the same precision I brought to everything else in my professional life. Meanwhile, word started getting around. Major Brennan had filed a formal commendation through official channels, a detailed memo that referenced the Helmand Province mission and my specific actions during the rescue operation. It wasn't flashy or self-promotional, but it circulated through the appropriate command structures. People I hadn't spoken to in years sent congratulations messages. A few junior officers who'd heard pieces of the story approached me in the hallways with questions. I deflected politely but didn't shut down the attention entirely. My parents heard about my transfer through someone else entirely. An old family friend whose son served in the Air Force happened to see the official announcement. My mother called again, this time leaving a voicemail that mixed confusion with hurt feelings. Why didn't you tell us you were taking a new command position? We had to hear about it from the Robinsons. This is a significant accomplishment, Diana. You should have said something to us directly. I listened to the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Garrett tried harder to reach me. He called multiple times, sent several text messages, even sent an email with the subject line, "Can we please talk about this?" I responded once briefly, "I'm not angry. I'm just extremely busy with the transition. We'll catch up when things settle down." It was mostly true. I wasn't angry in the traditional sense. I was simply done investing emotional energy in people who consistently refused to invest back. The change of command ceremony was held on a cold morning in mid-November. The sky was grey, the wind sharp enough to cut through dress uniforms. I stood on the platform next to the outgoing commander, a colonel named Patterson who'd held the position for 3 years and looked genuinely ready to retire. Cortez was there representing the higher command structure. A few hundred personnel stood in formation, faces young and old, all watching the formal transfer of authority. The ceremony itself followed traditional ritual. Orders read aloud, command flag passed from one officer to another, salutes exchanged with precision. I gave a short speech afterward. No grand promises, no inspirational platitudes that would sound good but mean little. Just a clear statement of expectations. We exist to move people and equipment where they need to be, when they need to be there. That is the core mission. Everything else is secondary to that purpose. I expect professionalism, accountability, and genuine respect for every person you work with. In return, I will fight for the resources you need to do this job correctly. Let's get to work. Patterson handed me the unit flag, heavy and familiar in my hands. Cortez saluted formally. I returned it with equal precision. And just like that, it was done. I was in command of my own operational unit. Afterward, there was a small reception in the headquarters building. Junior officers introduced themselves formally. Senior enlisted personnel sized me up with the practiced eye of people who'd seen many commanders come and go. I shook hands until my wrist actually ached. No family members attended. I hadn't invited them, and they hadn't asked if they should come. Late that afternoon, I found myself alone in my new office, a space that still carried the faint smell of the previous commander's preferred coffee blend. I sat behind the desk, looked at the bare walls that would soon hold my own professional achievements and photos, and felt something very close to peace. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Major Brennan. "Congratulations on the command, Mom." "Well deserved," I replied. "Thank you, Major. I hope your squadron is treating you well." A pause, then his response came through. "They are. Captain Garrett is learning. Slowly, but he's learning." I smiled at that, understanding the subtext. Another text came through immediately after, this time from an unknown number. "This is Lieutenant Sullivan, ma'am. I've been assigned to your unit. Looking forward to serving under your command." I typed back, "Welcome aboard, Lieutenant. Let's make this count." I set the phone down and stared out the window at the flight line, where a large cargo aircraft was taxiing into takeoff position. The engines roared to full power, the aircraft lifted smoothly off the runway, and I watched it climb steadily until it disappeared into the low clouds. This was what I had signed up for all those years ago. Not recognition from people who couldn't see me. Not validation from family who'd chosen to look elsewhere. Just the work done well with people who understood what it meant to serve something larger than themselves. Everything else was just noise in the background. Garrett struggled in the months that followed. I didn't hear about it directly, of course, but word travels quickly in the Air Force, especially when people are connected through the same general command structure, even loosely. Major Brennan remained his commanding officer, and Brennan was the kind of leader who refused to tolerate mediocrity or excuse-making from anyone under his authority. 6 weeks after I took command, I ran into a pilot from Garrett's squadron at a joint readiness conference in Virginia. We were standing in line for coffee during a scheduled break, and she recognized my name from the badge I was wearing. "You're Captain Garrett's sister, aren't you?" Lieutenant Commander Roth asked. She was Navy, assigned to a joint evaluation team. Probably mid-40s with the kind of weathered competence that comes from decades of demanding service. "I am," I confirmed. "How's he doing in his current position?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, which told me everything I needed to know. "He's figuring things out. Major Brennan is a demanding mentor, but fair in his expectations. Your brother has genuine potential. He just needs to stop assuming the rank insignia does the work for him." I nodded, completely unsurprised. "That sounds exactly right. Brennan talks about you sometimes," she added. "Not in excessive detail, but enough that those of us working with him understand you're someone worth genuine respect. I think your brother is slowly beginning to realize he's been operating in your shadow without knowing it all these years. He'll figure out his own path eventually," I said. "Or he won't. Either way, it's his responsibility now." She gave me a sharp look, evaluating. "You're harder on him than Brennan is." "I'm realistic about him. There's a significant difference." I didn't elaborate further, and she didn't push the topic. But she wasn't wrong in her assessment. I had genuinely stopped carrying the emotional weight of Garrett's success or failure. He was a grown man, an officer in the United States Air Force, fully responsible for his own decisions and career trajectory. If he wanted to build something meaningful, he would have to do it on his own demonstrated merits. I'd given him enough advantages already. Around that same period, my parents tried reaching out again. My father called from a number I didn't recognize, so I answered without thinking, not realizing it was him until I heard his voice. "Diana, it's your father." I almost hung up immediately, but decided to hear what he wanted. "Hello? Your mother and I have been trying to reach you for weeks now. I've been busy with the new command." "We know. We heard about it through other channels." "That's actually a big accomplishment." "It is." A long pause. He was clearly waiting for me to fill the silence, to make things easy for him the way I always had before. I didn't. Finally, he said, "We'd like to come visit you. See where you're stationed now. Maybe take you out to dinner, spend some real time together." "That's not necessary." "It's not about necessary. We're your parents, Diana. And I'm your daughter who you publicly dismissed in front of a room full of people because I wasn't the child you wanted me to be." The words came out calm and factual, not angry, just stating objective truth. He sputtered for a moment. "That was just a joke at the reception. You're being overly sensitive about this whole thing." "Maybe I am sensitive. Or maybe you've been casually dismissive for so long that you don't even recognize it as dismissive anymore. We're proud of you, he said, and it sounded completely hollow. Are you proud? Or are you embarrassed that you didn't realize what I'd accomplished until someone else pointed it out in a way you couldn't ignore? Silence on the other end of the line. I'm not angry, I continued in the same calm tone, but I'm also not going to pretend the last 20 years didn't happen the way they happened. You have my email address? If you genuinely want to rebuild some kind of relationship, start there with actual honesty, not with visits and dinners that pretend everything has always been fine between us. I hung up before he could formulate a response. My hands were perfectly steady. Later that evening, I received an email from my mother. It was 3 paragraphs long, full of justifications and deflections, ending with the phrase, "We just want to be a family again, like we used to be." I read it carefully twice, then filed it away in a folder without responding. Colonel Cortez visited my base in early December as part of a routine inspection tour of commands in the region. She found me in the operations center reviewing a fuel logistics report that had numbers that didn't quite add up correctly. "You look busy," she observed. "Always am." She pulled up a chair next to my desk. "I heard your unit earned top readiness scores for the quarter. Impressive turnaround in such a short time. We did what needed to be done. It's more than that. Command clearly suits you well." I looked up from the problematic report. "It's what I was trained to do over many years. It's more than just training. You're not simply managing resources and personnel. You're genuinely leading them. There's a significant difference between those two approaches." I set the report aside, giving her my full attention. "What brings you here specifically, Mom?" "I doubt it's just to compliment my unit's readiness scores." She smiled slightly. "I wanted to see how you're settling into the position, and to make sure you're not drowning in family drama that might affect your performance." "I'm not drowning. I've established clear boundaries." "Good." She stood and walked to the window overlooking the flight line where aircraft were being prepared for evening operations. "You know, I've watched many talented officers burn themselves out, trying desperately to prove their worth to people who will never genuinely appreciate them. The best ones eventually learn to let that futile effort go. The mediocre ones keep chasing that validation until it destroys their careers and their peace of mind. Which category do you think I fall into? You're the one who finally stopped chasing." She turned back to face me directly. "That memo Brennan filed about the Helmand Province operation. It's made its way through all the appropriate channels now. The right people know exactly who you are and what you've accomplished. Not because you demanded recognition, but because your record has finally caught up with you in official documentation." I nodded slowly, understanding. "And my family will either come around to understanding that, or they won't. Either way, it's not my problem to solve anymore." "Exactly right. It's not your problem." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Keep doing what you're doing, Diana. The trajectory is clear if you stay focused on the mission." That night, after most of the unit personnel had gone home or to their quarters, I sat alone in my office and drafted a message to Lieutenant Mark Sullivan, one of the young officers who'd reached out when I first took command. He'd asked for mentorship, and I'd agreed to regular monthly check-ins to discuss his development. "Lieutenant Sullivan, let's talk about real leadership. Not the theoretical kind they teach in textbooks and classrooms, but the kind you actually have to live every single day. First principle, let your record outlast other people's opinions of you. People will doubt your abilities. They'll dismiss your achievements. They'll underestimate your potential. They'll try to take credit for your work. Let them. Your job is not to fight constantly for recognition. Your job is to do the work so consistently well that recognition eventually becomes inevitable rather than negotiable. Second principle, choose your battles with great care. Not everything deserves an immediate response or confrontation. Some things you let slide because they're genuinely not worth your limited energy. Other things you must confront directly because staying silent would compromise your fundamental integrity. Learn to tell the difference between those two categories. Third principle, take genuine care of your people. They are not tools or resources to be used up. They are complete human beings with families waiting for them, fears they're managing, and futures they're trying to build. If you remember that basic humanity consistently, they will follow you anywhere the mission requires. Looking forward to our next conversation. Respectfully, Colonel Diana. I hit send and felt something shift internally. This was how I would move forward from here. Not by convincing my family I was worth their respect and attention, but by shaping the next generation of officers who would never have to fight those same battles for basic recognition. A week later, Major Brennan sent a brief email. "Colonel, I'm forwarding you an after-action report from a recent joint training exercise. Captain Garrett performed well in his assigned role. Thought you would want to know." Attached was a 3-page detailed assessment. Garrett had led flight coordination during a simulated combat scenario, and according to Brennan's evaluation, he had demonstrated notably improved judgment and communication skills under pressure. It was genuine progress. Small perhaps, but real and documented. I replied simply, "Thank you, Major. I appreciate you keeping me informed." I didn't forward the report to my parents. If Garrett wanted them to know about his progress, he would tell them himself. As for me, I had an entire operational unit to run effectively. The next 18 months passed with remarkable speed. My unit conducted operations across 3 continents, logged over 10,000 flight hours, and maintained a safety record that made senior leadership take genuine notice. I mentored junior officers personally, mediated personnel conflicts when necessary, allocated scarce resources strategically, and occasionally flew as a mission observer to stay current with operational realities. I was good at this work. I knew it with certainty. My people knew it, and eventually the promotion board knew it too. In March, I received official notification that I'd been selected for promotion to full colonel, the insignia of an 06, commonly called full bird in military slang. The kind of rank that doesn't come easily, that represents decades of demonstrated competence and earned trust at every level. The notification arrived via official email at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. I read it twice carefully, set down my coffee mug, allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of quiet satisfaction, then moved on to addressing the day's operational agenda. Colonel Cortez called an hour later. "Congratulations on the promotion, Diana." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate everything you've done to support my career. You earned this entirely on your own merits. The ceremony is scheduled for May, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "Mid-May at my current location. I'll be there to pin on your new rank personally. Diana, listen carefully. This is the rank level where people start watching everything you do with much closer attention. Not because they're looking for mistakes to criticize, but because they're actively deciding whether you're ready for even higher levels of responsibility and authority. Stay sharp and focused. Always, ma'am." The official promotion ceremony was scheduled for May 15th. I sent a brief factual email to my parents and Garrett informing them of the date and location. I didn't explicitly invite them, but I didn't actively exclude them either. The decision was entirely theirs to make. My mother responded within an hour. "We'll definitely be there. So incredibly proud of you." Garrett's response arrived 2 days later. "Wouldn't miss it for anything." "Congratulations, sis. You've earned this." I felt nothing in particular reading those messages. No relief, no lingering resentment. Just simple acknowledgement that they'd been sent and received. Meanwhile, my days were consumed entirely with complex transition planning. Promotion to full colonel meant new responsibilities would follow, likely a new command assignment somewhere down the line. I was clearly being positioned for something significantly larger, though the specific details were still forming in the bureaucratic machinery. I met with Cortez in mid-April to discuss emerging options. "They're seriously looking at you for a composite wing command," she said, spreading a thick folder across her desk. "Multi-mission profile, approximately 500 personnel, mixed force of active duty and reserve components. It would be genuinely challenging, but you're absolutely ready for it." Where would the assignment be located? That's still being determined through the assignment process. Could be stateside, could be overseas. You'll know definitively by July at the latest. I nodded, processing. "What's the realistic timeline for transition?" "You'd take command sometime in early next year. That gives you roughly 6 months to wrap up your current responsibilities and prepare properly for the new role." It was exactly the trajectory I'd been working toward methodically for years. And yet it felt slightly surreal. Not because I didn't believe I deserved the opportunity, but because I'd spent so many years being functionally invisible that this level of visibility still felt foreign to my natural instincts. Cortez must have read something in my expression. "You look concerned about something." "Not concerned, just processing the implications." "You're not second-guessing yourself, are you?" "No, ma'am, not at all." "Good. Because you are one of the finest officers I've worked with in 30 years of service. And if you start doubting that reality now, I will be deeply disappointed in you. I smiled slightly. Understood clearly, ma'am. The promotion ceremony itself was held on the same flight line where I'd taken command of the unit 18 months earlier. The weather cooperated beautifully. Clear skies, mild temperature, a light breeze that kept the unit flags moving gently. About 300 personnel stood in precise formation, along with a handful of senior officers from the regional command structure. My parents arrived early, dressed formally, looking noticeably older than I remembered from the last time I'd seen them. Garrett came in full uniform, now a major himself. He'd been promoted 6 months earlier, a fact I'd learned through official channels and routine notifications rather than through any personal phone call from him. We exchanged brief greetings, professional, cordial, maintaining appropriate distance. The ceremony followed the standard script that generations of officers had used. Orders read aloud with formal precision. Old rank insignia carefully removed, new insignia pinned on with ceremonial significance. Cortez performed the honors personally, her hands steady and sure as she affixed the Silver Eagle insignia to my shoulders. She stepped back, rendered a crisp salute, and I returned it with equal precision. Then she leaned in slightly and said quietly, "Exceptionally well done, Diana." "Thank you, ma'am." I gave a short speech to the assembled formation. No grand declarations that would sound impressive but ring hollow. No emotional appeals that would feel manipulative. Just a clear, honest statement about the work ahead and the people who made it possible. Leadership is fundamentally a trust we accept, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the formation. It's not about titles on paper or rank insignia on shoulders. It's about the responsibility we willingly accept when we put on this uniform every morning. To serve with genuine integrity. To lead with authentic humility, and to never forget that the mission depends absolutely on every single person doing their assigned job well. I'm honored to continue that work alongside all of you. The applause was polite but genuine, the kind that comes from people who've seen you work rather than just heard about your reputation. Afterward, there was a modest reception in the wing headquarters building. Junior officers introduced themselves formally. Senior enlisted leaders sized me up with eyes that had evaluated countless commanders before me. I shook hands methodically until my wrist genuinely ached from the repetition. My parents hovered uncertainly near the refreshments table, clearly unsure how to approach me or what to say. Garrett stayed close to them, his posture noticeably stiff with discomfort. Eventually, my mother gathered enough courage to approach. "Diana, that was a beautiful ceremony. Really moving. Thank you. We're so proud of you." "We truly always have been proud." I looked at her. This woman who'd spent decades making it abundantly clear through countless small actions that I was secondary in importance to my brother. I felt an odd kind of pity rather than anger. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, keeping my tone carefully neutral. My father stepped forward, clearly wanting to contribute. "Colonel, that's really quite something significant." "It is. We should have. We didn't fully realize." He trailed off, searching unsuccessfully for words that wouldn't come. "It's fine," I said simply. "Really, it's fine." "Is it really?" Garrett cleared his throat awkwardly. "Diana, can we talk privately for a few minutes?" I glanced at my watch. "I have about 10 minutes before I need to get back to addressing some operational issues." We stepped outside together, walking toward the edge of the flight line, where the noise and activity of the reception faded into background hum. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes focused on the ground rather than on me. "I owe you a genuine apology," he finally said. "A real one this time. You've said similar things before." "I know I have, but I mean it differently now." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I used to think you just got lucky in your career. That you were in the right place at the right time, or that people gave you advantages because you were a woman and they needed the diversity numbers to look good." He paused. I was completely wrong about all of that. I waited silently, letting him work through whatever he needed to say. "You're a better officer than I'll probably ever become," he continued with clear difficulty. And I spent years actively not seeing that truth because I was too focused entirely on myself and my own progression. I'm genuinely sorry for that. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said directly to me. I let his words sit in the air between us for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Apology accepted." "That's it, just like that?" "What else do you want me to say, Garrett?" "I don't know. That maybe we can start over somehow. that things can be different between us going forward. I considered that carefully. Garrett, I don't need things to be radically different from what they are now. What I need is for things to be fundamentally honest. If you genuinely want to build some kind of meaningful relationship, it has to be based on who we actually are as people, not on who Mum and Dad wanted or expected us to be. Can you do that? He nodded slowly, seriously. I can try. I want to try. Then we'll see how it goes from here. I checked my watch again. I really do need to get back now. He came to attention and saluted me formally. Not the casual acknowledgement we'd exchanged at previous family events, but a proper military salute. The kind you render to a superior officer you genuinely respect from the core of your being. I returned it with equal formality, surprised by the unexpected tightness I felt in my chest. We walked back to the reception together in companionable silence. My parents left shortly after that exchange, offering polite goodbyes and vague promises to stay in better touch. I didn't hold my breath expecting dramatic change, but I also didn't completely close the door on future possibilities. The rest of the evening blurred into a continuous stream of congratulations and small talk with people I barely knew. By the time the last guests finally departed, I was thoroughly exhausted. 2 years later, I stood in a different building on a different base, wearing the same Silver Eagle insignia, but carrying a distinctly different weight of responsibility. The composite wing command had come through exactly as Cortez had predicted. 500 personnel, 3 distinct mission sets, operations spanning 2 continents. It was complex, demanding, and exactly where I wanted to be at this stage of my career. Garrett was overseas by then, a major running a logistics squadron in the Pacific Theater. We exchanged emails occasionally, brief operational updates that felt less obligatory than they used to feel. He'd grown steadily into his rank and responsibilities, finally learned the crucial difference between superficial confidence and genuine competence, and had started mentoring younger officers in his command the same way I'd once mentored him years ago. I heard about his progress through mutual professional contacts, and I was genuinely glad for his development. My parents had settled into a tentative form of respect. They called less frequently than before, but when they did reach out, the conversations felt quieter and less performative. My mother asked about my actual work without immediately pivoting the conversation to Garrett's latest accomplishments. My father stopped making casual jokes at my expense entirely. It wasn't warm familial closeness exactly, but it was honest. And honest was significantly better than the alternative. The promotion ceremony for my new command was held on a cold morning in November. Smaller audience this time, mostly just personnel from the wing itself rather than a broader regional gathering. Cortez attended, now a brigadier general herself and still my fiercest professional advocate. The ceremony followed the same ritual I'd participated in multiple times before. Orders formally read, guidon flag passed with ceremonial precision, brief speeches about continuity and mission focus. I kept my remarks characteristically short and direct. We're here to execute the mission with precision and unwavering integrity. That's the standard I expect from every person in this command. Meet that standard consistently and we'll accomplish extraordinary things together. Fall short and we'll identify the problems and fix them together as a team. Let's get to work. Afterward, as people began filtering out toward their respective duties, Garrett appeared unexpectedly. I genuinely hadn't expected to see him. He was supposed to be deployed overseas, but there he stood in his service dress uniform, looking noticeably older and more grounded than I remembered from our last meeting. Surprise, he said with a slight smile. What are you doing here? I thought you were in the middle of a deployment cycle. Mid-tour leave. I timed it specifically so I could be here for this. He stepped closer, came to full attention, and rendered a formal salute. Not the casual acknowledgement we'd exchanged at my last ceremony, but a complete formal salute. The kind you give a superior officer you genuinely respect from the core of your being. I returned it formally, surprised again by the unexpected tightness in my chest. He lowered his hand slowly. I wanted to be here to see this happen because you deserve to have family members who actually show up for the important moments. Thank you, I said quietly. That means more than you probably realize. I mean it, Diana. I know I was late figuring things out. Embarrassingly late. But I see you clearly now, and I'm genuinely proud to be your brother. It was enough. Not perfect, not erasing years of dismissal and casual neglect, but enough. We stood there together for a moment, 2 military officers on a cold flight line. And I realized that this moment, this small, honest acknowledgement, was more valuable to me than any formal ceremony could ever be. My parents arrived late, slipping quietly into the back of the reception room just as things were starting. They didn't make any kind of scene or demand attention. They simply stood there watching quietly. When I caught my mother's eye across the room, she nodded deliberately. A small gesture, but clearly intentional. I nodded back in acknowledgement. That evening, after everyone had finally left and the building had emptied out, I sat alone in my new office and stared out at the flight line. A large cargo aircraft was taxiing for departure, engines roaring at full power, navigation lights cutting bright lines through the gathering dusk. Words that Cortez had spoken years earlier echoed in my mind. Let the record speak for itself. It had done exactly that. Not loudly, not with dramatic fanfare or public recognition, but steadily and undeniably over time. The missions successfully flown, the people effectively led, the critical decisions made correctly under intense pressure. The record was there in official documentation, and it had outlasted every casual dismissal, every thoughtless joke, every moment when I'd been functionally invisible to the people who should have seen me most clearly. Recognition, I'd finally learned, wasn't a reward you pursued or demanded. It was simply a record finally catching up with reality. And sometimes, if you remained patient and focused on the work itself, the people who mattered most would eventually catch up too. I straightened my uniform one final time and walked out into the night. There was important work waiting to be done, and I was exactly where I needed to be. Respect once demanded loudly fades quickly. Respect earned quietly through consistent excellence stays forever.